Teachers or professors of Reddit, what is the most elaborate cheating scheme you've stumbled upon? University of Florida circa 1985. Once a final began, the answers were posted across campus so you could grade your final and figure your grade. One fraternity had their pledges get the answers. They then used a Mr. Microphone to broadcast them to brothers via FM Walkmans. In high school, a few times I would get purposefully caught not cheating. I would make it look like I was reading something hidden in my hand, and inevitably the teacher would come over and inspect to not find anything. After that, it was fair game. The teacher wouldn't check me again because she was embarrassed about falsely accusing me before. For a biology test, one student wrote down all of his notes on pieces of gum, then proceeded to eat the evidence one piece at a time. Not a teacher, but during their standard grade exam, some female students at my old school wrote answers and things to remember on their legs, then put tights and a skirt on over them. By pulling them tight, they could see through and read the answers, and for obvious reasons, no invigilator is going to come over, lift up their skirts and pull on their tights a bit. I should add, if you're thinking about doing this genius plan, just remember they did actually get caught and completely disqualified from all their exams. There was a similar thread before this that I can't find, but this was one of my favorite schemes from that thread. A student successfully obtains the answer key to a test. The student then makes a bracelet with beads, with colored beads corresponding with the letters. So if the answers on a test went at DCBAD, the bracelet might have a black bead to indicate the start. But then a red bead for A. A green bead for D. A blue bead for C. A yellow bead for B. Another red bead for A. And finally a green bead for D. Unless you know the plan, it looks just like a beaded bracelet. It's not too elaborate, but I randomize all of the questions on my quizzes. I tell my students to take them alone. Every semester, I get quizzes and they have all the right answers in the wrong order. They work together and don't even take time to look at the questions. What was the most popular typeface of the 1960s? The French Revolution. Edit, the answer is Helvetica. Took a music class and we had to memorize jazz music and pick the era and name of the musician. My friend loved jazz and already knew all the information. He could have taught the class, and he was the one that convinced us to take it. Well, after our first exam, we got C's and he got an A. We had to come up with a way to survive. So we told him to use feet commands, and I would sit on one side of him, and our other friend would sit on the other side. If he spread his feet like that was A, that was B, that was C, and it was D. Worked amazingly well. We all got us from then on. I have kind of a cheating inception story. I had a CS professor who gave us a completely brutal take-home final exam. Much harder than the work we had been exposed to previously in class, and it was worth like 30% of the final grade. In desperation, I Googled one of the questions to see if I could find any forum posts on similar problems. Instead, I ended up finding out that the teacher had lifted the final in its entirety from another university's website. That website also provided the answers to the questions, which I then lifted. I'm pretty sure the professor knew what I did, but couldn't call me out without exposing that she had lifted the exam from elsewhere, rather than writing it like she was supposed to. It was not so elaborate, but in my school, these kids would bring in camera pens and would take pictures of the tests, quizzes, and later distribute them. The teachers didn't notice the students holding their pens high above their papers until about 2 weeks later. We had some quite oblivious teachers. Edit spelling. Had an exam worth 50% of our grade. Professor was quite strict about pencils, water bottles, etc. We asked her what the deal was and she regaled us with a story about a Chinese girl who wore a beautiful, long dress with Chinese writing all over her dress. Turns out the girl had sewn patches with the answers to the test onto her dress. Not 100% sure if it actually happened or just a deterrent for would-be cheaters. I've read of one scheme where a couple of band students got a copy of another class's multiple choice test. They put all of the correct answers into sheet music. They just made sure that paper was on top when they had to clear their desks. University teacher here, undergraduates in the second year of their degree. To be honest, most cheating schemes are incredibly mundane and repetitive. Year on year, students tend to do the same sorts of stuff, with plagiarism outweighing all other cheating options by about 99%. Incidentally, if anyone's getting ready to start their first semester of university in the next 6 weeks or so, don't plagiarize. It's incredibly easy to detect with modern software. And almost always ruins your grade. Edit to the many people saying you can just get rounded by downloading the software and paraphrasing sources instead of copying, etc. That's not a way to beat the system. That is literally what we're teaching you to do. It's called research. Current teacher that has seen plenty of cheating. I've yet to have a student top mine from college. Had a monster paper due during my master's. I only got A about a third of the way done, so I printed it out and proceeded to throw it on the ground and step all over it. After class, I gave the paper to the department secretary and claimed I saw it outside and recognized the professor's name on it. I hightailed it out of there before the professor could make it downstairs to claim it. 5 minutes later, I got a call apologizing for the paper falling out of her stack and asking if I could bring in a new copy on Monday. Got an A. 2 girls wearing hijabs communicating with each other via Bluetooth during multiple exams. I once caught someone copying their paper from 4 websites rather than just copying one. My friend sat behind me. If he needed an answer, he'd tap my back once with his pen. I'd touch the side of my head with my pen when I was ready to listen. He'd tap my back with the number of the question. For example, 25 would be 2 taps, pause, 5 taps. I'd tap my head with my pen with the answer. For example, 3 taps was a C. If I didn't know the answer, I'd just scratch my head with my pen. If I needed an answer, I'd hold my pen to my head like I was thinking, and he'd tap my back once when he saw me. I'd tap the question number against my head using the same scheme, and he'd tap my back with the number of the answer. Never got caught. This is a pretty elaborate one that happened when I was a preschool aide. We had music class on Wednesday. The class was split in half, one group did an art project while the other went to music. This happened right before lunch and after nap. So one group would go to art before lunch and then wake up from nap and go to music. Well, one boy, who we will call Music Hater, or MH, hate music, hence the name. His friend, who we will call Music Lover, loved music. So during nap time they switched clothes so MH wouldn't have to go to music. He woke up and ML could go to music twice. They thought that if they changed clothes we would think MH was ML. I let MH skip music and do art twice because I was just impressed that they were able to switch clothes without us teachers noticing. When I was a student, I would cheat during tests where we had to memorize entire paragraphs, not sure what good that did. Basically, the day before, I will write the whole passage really hard on the pad of paper I will be using. Since I sit near the window, the light makes it easy to see the depression in the paper. I haven't worked on a class large enough, but I've heard tell of an Asian flying V. The name suggests it's more common among groups of students from countries with looser academic honesty codes. The smartest student sits in the front row of the auditorium. 2 more sit in the next row up to the left and right of the smartest. So as the smartest student answers questions, the dumber students sitting in a sight line can pass the answers back up the row. I suck at stories, but I'll try anyways. In college I would work on things in a particular computer lab in the same building almost every day. Throughout the semester I noticed my professor of a different class, by different I mean one that didn't assign the work I was usually working on, would come in before every test and use the exact same computer to email a copy of the test to himself. Well, at this time I thought it would be cool to see if I could keylog his password, open his email, save the test, and then mark his email as unread. I had in my possession a hardware keylogger that I planned to put on the computer the day he would be using it and save the test. In the computer lab they had cameras, which I assume was to catch a thief of hardware. Well, I decided if they suspected someone tampering the computer they would check the tapes. So early in the semester I decided to use his computer and pretend having trouble with the keyboard I was using. Walk behind it to the tower and adjust the cord to make it work again. And planted my device. I then used different computers every time I came in. But the day before the final, after he came in to transfer the test, I used that computer one more time and once again feigned concern that the keyboard wasn't working. Grabbed my device, pocketed it, and continued to work for an hour. Later that night, I had a friend drive me around to find an unsecured Wi-Fi. Before we left the house I changed my hardware MAC address on my laptop. Used a barebones Firefox to ensure a minimal generic browser footprint. Logged into his email. Downloaded the test. And then marked it as unread. It worked and no one was the wiser, but looking back I can't believe I did it. Both of these stories are not so much elaborate cheats, but hilarious we thought you were cheating stories. One had a student asking to go to the bathroom repeatedly during the exam. TA followed student in to see what stall they were using, and when the student left, searched the stall for notes. Instead, found a bag of Coke. Thought it might be a coincidence. Pulled the student's exam afterwards, and it made absolutely no sense. Student was doing lines during the exam and wrote perhaps the most insane thing I've ever read. Student enters the exam with enormous margarine tub full of chili. At the time, students were allowed to bring food. Not anymore. Professor gets suspicious and requests the student show us the chili to prove he has not hidden any notes or his words written the answers on the beans. Student sits down to complete the exam, only to realize they forgot to bring any spoon fork. Student spends 3-hour exam eating entire tub of chili with the 2 pens like chopsticks and finishes the exam on time. It was an incredible feat to witness. Requested the professor provide bonus marks for sheer determination, but the request was denied. I used to get my homework done by telling one group that I would do the first 6 questions while they do the last 6 questions. And then telling a different group that I would do the last 6 questions while they do the first 6 questions. When both groups were done, I would give my half to each of them and would just have to paraphrase all 12. Cheat the teachers and your classmates. For an assessment, I gave in an essay that wasn't complete but was what I had at the time. Then went and spent the rest of the day completing it. Found the teacher. Apologized and said that I had accidentally given her a draft. I was a right nerd and got away with it without a problem. A few years ago in high school, I had long hair and listened to my iPod during every class. I had the cord run down inside the back of my shirt and I'd have one earbud in. I did this for 2 years and never got caught. One day I realized I could record myself and put it on my iPod. Brilliant. I passed my finals with that bad boy. Indeed, a lot of people are saying the best way of doing this is with the earbud in your hand through your sleeve, and you can just rest your head against your hand. It's a good strategy if you have short hair. That is also the uncomfortable way of doing it. In German class, most of our tests were vocabulary terms. My friends and I sat near the wall where there was a bulletin board. He would disguise the answers as the lunch menu or some other legit-looking paperwork. Here's a good one. Professor prints out all 150 exams the day before test and leaves them on his desk accidentally. He suspects a student came in during office hours and stole an exam to fill in at home. Sure enough, he counts 149 exams. Instead of rewriting the entire test and cutting his losses, he goes to the paper cutter and chops off a 1/4 inch from the bottom margin of all 149 exams. When the test was over, he straightened the stack of exams and up pops the one that was stolen the day before. Since No Child Left Behind went into effect, cheating by teachers on behalf of students would have to be the most elaborate cheating scheme I've stumbled upon. Not really cheating, but in my freshman science class, if someone important, principal, dead, superintendent came to sit in on my teacher, he would warn us ahead of time. If he asked a question and you did not know it, you rose your right hand. If you knew a question and you did know it, you rose your left hand. That way it would appear to the person sitting in that everyone knew it and he was doing a good job as a teacher. Lols. I let someone copy off me once, but my handwriting is so bad she wrote some Y's in place of 4's. The teacher caught on to the most elaborate by default cheating scheme I have ever done by marking the incorrectly transcribed problems wrong and leaving a really snarly note on her papers. 5254. Next time you copy, make sure you can read the person's handwriting. There was one class at a school near me that is famous all across the state. Because in one exam the entire front of the room raised their hand to distract the exam supervisors so the back of the room could discuss questions. Then vice versa. Worked for them too. Well, my high school teacher cheated on his wife with a student. For my midterms and finals, I'd give each student a 3x5 note card which they could use one side to write anything they wanted. In the real world, anyone can look up things like equations, so I figured it was fair. After all, I wanted to make sure they knew the operations. Incidentally, every year, the vast majority of students would say, after I copied all the notes on the card, I could remember them and didn't even need it. Until one year a student came in with his card having the tiniest handwriting I ever saw. I couldn't read it. Turns out he was wearing both contacts and his glasses, giving a major magnification effect. Or so he told me years later. Once, all students refused to take an exam because it got rated on the highest score. Since they all got zeros, they all got 100%. After that, the system changed. I wasn't a teacher, merely a student. But there were old tests and quizzes floating around from the previous years. Problem with the class was, those tests were the exact same, as were the quizzes. It took her a good 2 months before she found out what was wrong. Suddenly, kids started dropping out of the class. Students hiding smartphones in their calculators.